Hey readers, today and this week we are going to be focusing on one particular skill, and that skill is how do parts of a story relate to the whole story. So we're going to be analyzing how one part of a story fits in with the whole. So kind of like if you're looking at this picture here, how does this one puzzle piece, like what is the importance of this one puzzle piece and the whole piece, right? Without that one piece, the puzzle wouldn't be complete. And the same goes for a book that you're reading too. So we're thinking about how does this one part of the story fit into everything? All right, so this should actually look familiar to you because we have done this skill earlier in the year. So this is a total review, but I just want to remind you of what it is that we have to do when we think this way. So there are really three things that we want to be thinking about in order to answer this question of how does a part of a story relate to the overall or the whole story. So again, here's my puzzle, right? So you kind of always want to think like that in the back of your head. Think about a puzzle, like how does this fit into everything? And if you were to try a puzzle, maybe some of you have been doing puzzles at home. If you were missing that puzzle piece, the whole puzzle wouldn't be complete. We just want to think about it that way. So the first thing that you want to do is when you're looking at one particular puzzle piece or piece of your book, you want to identify what is the plot element that I'm looking at here, because that's going to give us an idea of how it's important. So I could have either maybe I'm looking at the conflict, or perhaps I'm looking at rising action, or maybe this part is the climax, or the falling action, or the resolution. But by knowing that, it will give you a better idea of how this is important to the whole, right? Because in all stories, all of these plot elements do the same thing. Okay, so then that brings us to our next question that we want to ask ourselves, which is, well, why is this part important and how is it important to the overall story? So, like I was just saying, a conflict in any story introduces the problem for the character. So that's why it's important. The rising action is where the problem gets worse and the character tries to deal with the problem. So that's why rising action is important. The climax is when the character faces tension. That's why it's important. In the falling action, the problem begins to be resolved. And that's why the falling action is important. And then lastly, the resolution is where the character solves the problem and learns a lesson. And that's why the resolution in a book is important. So no matter what book you're reading, it will fall, each of the plot elements will all have this significance to them. And then really the last thing that you want to do, where it says number 3, is you want to really think about how does this particular part, how is it important in this story that I'm reading, right? So in all stories, maybe the resolution is where the character learns solves the problem and learns a lesson. But like in this book that I'm reading, what is the resolution? How is it, what is it teaching me? So what does this part teach me about the character? Or how does it support the theme in this book that I'm reading? Okay, so I am going to give you an example of this from Marshfield Dreams. So in Marshfield Dreams, there was one part that's been identified. So I'm just going to um, read that part to you. So that's the part here that's in italics. So the part that is identified says, it's from the chapter Last Kiss, by the way. 2 more times I went to Dad for a goodnight kiss. No luck. Finally, I gave up. Mom still kissed me goodnight on my right cheek, but somehow it didn't feel the same. Her kisses didn't have the safe, solid feeling they'd had before. I laid in bed trying to figure it out. Even though I was confused, one thing seemed clear. My father and I had drifted away from each other in a small but important way, a way that I couldn't explain, not even to myself. So the question then is, how does this part of Marshfield Dreams relate to the overall story of Marshfield Dreams? So remember, there were 3 things that I really wanted to do in order to fully answer that question. I wanted to, let me just go back. Number 1 is think about or identify which plot element is this. Number 2, why is that plot element or part important? And lastly, what does this part in this book teach me about the character? And how does it support the theme in this book? So, like the third one is really taking it a step further and really thinking about the book that you're reading. Okay, so I tried to color code it just so you could see the three different parts. So let me just go through my response with you. So this particular part that I just read is the conflict. Okay, so I've identified the element, the plot element. So then the second thing is, well, what is that plot element? How is that plot element important in a story? So this plot element, the conflict, is important to the entire story, Marshfield Dreams, because it's where Ralph is introduced to a problem. Okay, so I actually found that right from here, right from this anchor chart. Okay, introduces the problem. Ralph learns here in this scene that things have changed between him and his father when he says, "One thing seemed clear. My father and I had drifted away from each other in a small but important way." So I decided to just quote that part. He does not understand why this change happened, though. Okay, and then remember that last thing that I want to do is think about, well, how is this really important in this book that I'm reading? So, this part teaches us more about Ralph because this is a moment when Ralph realizes and becomes aware that he seems to be growing up. And this also connects to a possible theme that I've actually previously identified, that in life, part of growing up is noticing when things change. So you can see here in my response that I really have three different things that I'm doing. I'm identifying the plot part, I'm explaining why that part's important, and then lastly, what does this particular part teach me about the character and how does it connect or support a theme in the book? So I'm doing three things. So today you are going to try this. So you're going to practice this on your own. You're going to pick a part. So you're actually going to pick a part that you decide in your independent book that you're reading and try to analyze how this part of the story relates to the whole. Okay, so I'll just show you really quick. Shared with you in Google Classroom is this document. So I kind of actually broke everything down for you. So you're going to identify the part in your independent book that you choose and analyze how it's important to the whole. So you just want to tell me what's the title and author of your book. I broke it down into those three different things that you're doing. So identify the part. So if you could just give me the quote or like describe the part that you've chosen, since I'm not reading the book with you, and then tell me what story element it is. So is it the conflict, rising action, climax, falling action, or resolution? Then you're explaining why this part is important. Right. And then lastly, remember you're making that connection and analyzing deeper in this book. What does this part teach me about the character in my book? And or how does this help to develop or support a theme in my book? Okay. Remember that you can always go back to the video that you're watching. And I also posted in Google Classroom the anchor chart as well as my sample response. So you can always go back to my sample just to take a look, or the anchor chart. And then just a heads up, so today is a practice day to try this with your own book. But on Thursday, we're going to have a graded check-in. So just like we've done in class, with individual skills, where you're going to try this with a short story that I will be sharing with you, just so that you're aware. If you do have questions or you're unsure about something, I'll be here to help you. Just either send me an email or you can join my office hours. All right. And off you go.